In 1942, an American general who had never seen direct combat in his 27-year military career was unexpectedly chosen over nearly 400 more senior officers to command all U.S. forces in the European theater. That man was Dwight D. Eisenhower. What makes it even more striking is that before being entrusted with this enormous responsibility, Eisenhower had never led a single major victorious battle. So why did Washington, specifically the U.S. military and government leadership, place their trust in him as supreme commander of the Allied forces in Europe during World War II? What did they see in a seemingly unknown officer to stake the fate of the war on him? Dwight D. Eisenhower was born in 1890 Inches, Texas, and raised in a poor working-class family in Kansas. He graduated from West Point in 1915, a class so remarkable that 59 of its members would later become generals. Eisenhower wasn't among the standouts. He ranked in the middle academically, was weak in discipline, and remained virtually unknown in military circles during his early years. But Eisenhower's true talent didn't lie on the parade grounds, it lay in his gift for organization. When World War I broke out, he yearned to see combat. Instead, he was kept in the rear to train tank troops. There, he demonstrated such exceptional ability in planning, coordination, and management that his superiors refused to send him anywhere else. Unfortunately, by the time he finally received orders to deploy to France, the war had ended. He never saw the battlefield, but he made himself a promise. From now on, I will carve my own path. And he did. Though stuck at the rank of major for 16 years after the war, Eisenhower never stopped learning. Under the mentorship of Colonel Fox Connor, one of the most respected military strategists of the time, he received a rigorous education in military history, the art of war, and, most importantly, the politics of coalition warfare. It was Connor who first taught Eisenhower that in an alliance, the ability to persuade can matter more than the ability to command. Armed with that foundation, Eisenhower went on to pass the entrance exam for the Army Command and General Staff School, graduating at the top of his class. He then finished first again at the Army War College. These achievements quietly marked him as one of the brightest staff officers in the U.S. Army, even though he still had no battlefield experience to his name. Between 1933 and 1939, Eisenhower served as an aide to General Douglas MacArthur, accompanying him to the Philippines. Their relationship was tense at times, bordering on outright confrontation, but it was within that high-pressure environment that Eisenhower learned one of the most valuable lessons of his career: how to work with big egos. One day, he would have to lead a coalition filled with such personalities, and the lessons from MacArthur would prove invaluable. As World War II loomed, Eisenhower was ready. He returned to the United States and helped organize large-scale maneuvers, including the famous Louisiana War Games of 1941, where he demonstrated an exceptional ability to plan and coordinate corps-level operations. His meticulous, realistic, and strategically sound plans left a strong impression on his superiors. In October of that year, he was promoted to temporary Major General, even though, by that point, Eisenhower had never directly commanded a large unit in the field. Still, Army leadership had begun to take notice. Here was a man who had never won a battlefield victory, but who could make a massive military machine run smoothly. Perhaps that, more than battlefield glory, was what they needed for a global war. In every story of extraordinary rise, there is often one key figure who appears at the right moment. For Dwight D. Eisenhower, that person wore 4 stars and a name that history would never forget: General George C. Marshall. As Army Chief of Staff during World War II, Marshall was the chief architect of America's entire war machine. But more importantly, he was the first to recognize the extraordinary potential hidden beneath Eisenhower's calm demeanor and quiet career. In late 1941, with America still reeling from the attack on Pearl Harbor, Marshall summoned Eisenhower to Washington. At the time, Ike was just an obscure staff lieutenant colonel who had never commanded in combat, but Marshall saw what few others dared believe. Here was a strategic mind of the highest order, and if placed in the right role, he could do something great. Eisenhower seized the opportunity. Less than 2 months after joining the General Staff, he presented a sweeping global counter-offensive plan that almost eerily would end up mirroring how the next 3 years of the war unfolded. When Marshall read that plan, he wasn't just impressed, he was convinced. From that moment forward, Eisenhower was no longer just a backroom planner, he had stepped into the circle of those who would shape the outcome of World War II. At the Arcadia Conference in early 1942, Eisenhower continued to impress not just his American peers, but even British Prime Minister Winston Churchill by offering sharp, clear-eyed assessments of the European situation. He didn't just see things accurately, he communicated them with a tone and logic that both the British and the Americans found credible. That ability to speak a common language across cultural lines would prove to be an invaluable asset in a fragile alliance like the Allies. Then, on the 25th of June 1942, Washington made a stunning decision that shocked much of the military establishment. Major General Dwight D. Eisenhower was appointed to head the U.S. Army forces in Europe, Eta USA. Just 6 months earlier, he had been a virtually unknown staff colonel. But Marshall hadn't chosen Eisenhower for his rank, he chose him for an ineffable synchrony between them. Eisenhower understood Marshall's strategic vision intuitively. He could lead with American resolve, negotiate with European finesse, and, most importantly, never fought for personal glory or position. Eisenhower was a leader without ego, but with immense influence. In Marshall's hand, he was the ace placed exactly where it belonged, a move that would ultimately alter the fate of Europe. The moment he set foot in London in mid-1942, Ike, as friends and colleagues fondly called him, wasted no time. He immediately set about building from scratch a model Allied command structure, where British and American officers worked side by side under a unified system. What seemed like a simple administrative arrangement was, in truth, Eisenhower's first great diplomatic triumph. Since World War I, the British had grown accustomed to coordinating through committees, each nation maintaining its independence, cooperating tactically but never ceding command. The idea of unified command, where one supreme commander oversaw multinational forces, was alien and, frankly, uncomfortable to them. But Eisenhower, with his earnest demeanor, transparent leadership style, and rare ability to listen, gradually changed their minds. He didn't lecture, he didn't issue edicts. He persuaded through fairness, through integrity, and through unwavering focus on the shared goal of defeating the Axis. To the British officers, Eisenhower didn't come across as a power-grabbing American general. He was a fair-minded umpire, putting outcomes above nationality. One British advisor would later remark, Eisenhower virtually invented the concept of unified command in modern warfare, and indeed, without him, the Supreme Allied Command might never have taken shape or worse, might have collapsed under the weight of inter-Allied rivalries. Churchill, too, gradually came around. In Eisenhower, he saw a reasonable American, humble, receptive, never boastful, never defensive, and most crucially, endlessly patient in managing towering egos. This soft diplomacy was something Eisenhower had honed during his years working under General Douglas MacArthur, a strategic genius, yes, but also one of the most difficult personalities in the U.S. military. By the time the Allied nations agreed on the necessity of appointing a single supreme commander for the European front, Eisenhower's name had already emerged as the obvious choice. But one crucial piece was still missing: a battlefield victory. He needed to prove that he wasn't just a brilliant strategist behind a desk, but someone capable of commanding a real operation under fire. That test came swiftly and brutally. In November 1942, Eisenhower was appointed commander of Operation Torch, the joint Anglo-American invasion of North Africa. It would be the first major confrontation between U.S. forces and the Axis powers, and notably, the responsibility didn't go to a battle-hardened general, it went to Eisenhower. The reason was clear. While he lacked direct combat experience, Ike possessed a rare talent for operational planning and combined arms coordination. A former expert in mechanized warfare, he understood modern conflict deeply, and more importantly, he knew how to harmonize different branches and national forces in a complex, multinational campaign. But Torch wasn't a seamless debut. After initial gains, American forces suffered a humiliating defeat at the Kasserine Pass in February 1943. Rommel's Afrika Korps routed the inexperienced U.S. troops, causing panic and retreat. Almost immediately, Eisenhower's credibility came under fire. Critics asked, had Marshall gambled on the wrong man? Eisenhower didn't deflect blame. He took responsibility. But rather than react defensively, he acted decisively. He brought in Lieutenant General George S. Patton, a hard-driving, bold commander, to take charge of the battered U.S. II Corps. To do that, Ike had to set aside his reservations about Patton's volatile temperament. The two were friends, but Patton was unpredictable. Still, Eisenhower understood that he was the aggressive battlefield leader Tunisia needed at that critical moment. Beyond that, Eisenhower overhauled logistics, improved coordination between air, armor, and infantry, and strengthened Allied cooperation with British forces under General Montgomery advancing from the east. The turnaround came quicker than anyone expected. With pressure from both east and west, the Allies forced Rommel into a corner. By May 1943, Axis forces in North Africa surrendered en masse. The campaign, despite its rocky beginning, ended in a decisive and momentum-shifting victory. And Eisenhower, he didn't triumph through audacious battlefield maneuvers. He triumphed through resilience, organizational mastery, and a keen eye for talent. Kasserine had been a wound, but also a lesson. From that point on, Eisenhower fully grasped a vital truth. Victory in modern warfare didn't come from a single heroic figure. It came from perfect synchronization of services, of nations, of personalities. The victory in North Africa was not just a military milestone, it was Eisenhower's passport into the ranks of those entrusted with steering the destiny of the Western Allies. And they didn't make him wait long. Just weeks after Rommel's retreat, Eisenhower was handed a new command, to lead Operation Husky, the massive Allied invasion of Sicily, an opening move in the campaign up the Italian peninsula. If North Africa had been his battlefield trial, then Sicily and Italy were his exams in the art of maneuvering not only armies, but egos. For under Ike's command now stood a veritable army of generals, names that drew either salutes or sidesteps. George Patton, brash, volatile, always ready to disobey orders if he believed the cause justified it. Bernard Montgomery, brilliant but insufferably arrogant, dismissive of his American peers and obsessively protective of British interests. Omar Bradley, calm and rational, the perfect foil to Patton's fire. Harold Alexander, the quintessential English gentleman, gracious, polished, yet quietly ambitious. They were like volatile elements in a high-energy chemical compound primed to ignite with the slightest spark. And Eisenhower? He was the catalyst ensuring that all that combustible energy drove toward a single reaction, the destruction of fascism. As Supreme Commander, Eisenhower was more than just a giver of orders. He was a diffuser of tensions, a mediator of clashing wills, and he did it with astonishing patience. He listened to all, endured snide remarks and simmering doubts even from his own subordinates. Montgomery once sneered that Ike lacked the stature for the job. Patton fumed over what he saw as favoritism toward the British. But Eisenhower didn't let pride cloud purpose. He understood that defeating Nazi Germany mattered more than bruised egos. In Sicily, when Montgomery and Patton began an unspoken race to reach Messina first, a rivalry so intense it risked unraveling the campaign, Ike didn't scold or strip authority. Instead, he reassigned tasks and framed their competition as part of a larger goal. The result? The Allies took the entire island on schedule, not through perfect unity but through a supreme commander who could transform rivalry into momentum. Even when Patton sparked scandal by slapping shell-shocked soldiers, an incident that provoked public outrage back home, Eisenhower held the line. He forced Patton to apologize and temporarily step down, but stopped short of total dismissal. Ike knew the flawed general was still a potent weapon, and indeed, Patton's talents would prove pivotal in battles yet to come. With Montgomery, Eisenhower had long endured the Britain's habit of acting like the center of the universe, but by late 1944, when Monty openly demanded supreme command and publicly criticized Allied strategy, Ike didn't hesitate to strike back. He flatly rejected the request and asserted his authority with unwavering clarity. Eisenhower understood the limits of accommodation, and when the moment called for it, he had no qualms about planting the flag of unified command. He knew, without a clear center of leadership, the Allied coalition risked fracturing from within. That's why he once declared, "I would rather resign as supreme commander than allow disagreements to divide the Allied nations." It wasn't a line meant to please, it was a pointed reminder, even to the most prideful generals, that unity was not optional. It was the price of victory. For Eisenhower, war and politics were inseparable. A victory on the map was meaningless if it dug chasms between partners. A great general, in the age of global war, was not merely a battlefield tactician. He was a keeper of men, of trust, of alliances. And so, among the many hard choices Eisenhower had to make, one decision remained constant: to place the cohesion of the Allied coalition above any individual, himself included. That principle would not only carry him through Sicily and the Italian campaign, but also drive the Allies toward the defining moment of Europe's liberation. The supreme commander of the Allied forces was not merely a man who issued orders, he was also the one tasked with untangling the psychological knots between his generals. And Ike did so with astonishing patience. He listened to everyone, even enduring barbed remarks and skepticism from his own subordinates. Montgomery once dismissed Eisenhower as not up to the position he'd been given. Patton would flare up at the slightest hint of favoritism toward the British. But Ike never let pride eclipse purpose. He understood one thing clearly: defeating the Germans mattered more than petty rivalries. In Sicily, when Montgomery and Patton raced covertly but fiercely to see who would reach Messina first, tension neared the breaking point. Yet Eisenhower didn't scold or revoke authority. He calmly reassigned tasks and redirected both generals toward the greater goal. The result? The Allies captured the island on schedule, not through perfect harmony, but through a commander who knew how to turn rivalry into propulsion. Even when Patton slapped a shell-shocked American soldier, an incident that triggered public outrage back home, Eisenhower kept his balance. He ordered Patton to apologize and temporarily step aside, but didn't banish him. Ike knew Patton would still be needed, and indeed, the volatile but brilliant general would prove crucial in battles yet to come. With Montgomery, Eisenhower long tolerated the field marshal's habit of seeing himself as the center of the universe. But by late 1944, when Monty demanded supreme command and openly criticized Allied strategy, Ike struck back without hesitation. He firmly rejected the request and reasserted his authority in no uncertain terms. Eisenhower knew the limits of concession, and when the situation called for it, he had no qualms about planting his flag on shared strategy. He understood, without a unified command center, the Allied coalition would splinter from within. That's why he once declared, "I would rather resign as supreme commander than allow discord to divide the Allied nations." It wasn't flattery, it was a reminder, even to the proudest generals, that unity wasn't optional. It was essential for victory. To Eisenhower, military affairs and politics were inseparable. A victory on the battlefield was meaningless if it carved fissures between allies. A true general, in the age of global war, wasn't just a tactician, he was a steward of people, trust, and alliance. That is why, among the countless difficult decisions Eisenhower made, one principle remained constant: placing the strength of the Allied coalition above any individual, himself included. It was this philosophy that carried him not only through the campaigns in Sicily and Italy, but all the way to the decisive turning point of the war in Europe, Normandy. Thanks to those unmistakable qualities and achievements, Eisenhower gradually earned the trust not just of Washington, but also of London and the other Allied nations. Prime Minister Churchill had initially hesitated to grant supreme authority to an American general with little public renown, but time and Eisenhower's style answered for him. Churchill came to call him the man with the smile, a friendly, disarming smile that proved to be as powerful a weapon as any artillery piece. Eisenhower had a gift for lowering defenses. He wielded simplicity, courtesy, and humility like a welcome mat for allies at the negotiating table. In meetings stretched taut with tension, a light-hearted remark or a glance of empathy from Ike could soften the room. The press adored him. Subordinates trusted him. Even the most strong-willed Allied commanders came to admit Eisenhower was fair, and it was that sense of fairness, not battlefield glory, that laid the firm foundation on which the Allied coalition could surge onto the continent. When discussions for the Normandy invasion began in late 1943, an operation that would determine Europe's fate, Eisenhower's name emerged as the natural choice. Though George Marshall, the architect of America's war effort, was Roosevelt's initial consideration, the president ultimately chose to keep him in Washington. And so Eisenhower, carrying with him experience from North Africa and Italy, a deft hand at coordinating generals and nations, and a rare blend of strategic vision and political finesse, was appointed Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force. Even then, some still questioned the choice. Why not Patton, the firebrand warrior? Why not Montgomery, the victor at El Alamein? Why not MacArthur, the Pacific icon? The answer was clear. D-Day needed more than a fighter, it needed a coalition builder. Not a champion, but a chief architect. Someone who could bring Britain, France, America, Canada, and others forward in unison. And that person could only be Dwight D. Eisenhower. On the eve of D-Day, the most massive military operation in modern history, Eisenhower was not stationed in a command room, poring over maps and radios. Instead, he donned a paratrooper's jacket and cap, and quietly walked into the camps where young soldiers were preparing for the mission that could cost them everything. They were boys, barely out of their teens, rifles in hand, but eyes still wide with confusion and anxiety before the storm of steel that awaited them. Ike, as everyone affectionately called him, did not give speeches or issue grand orders. He shook hands with each man, asked their names, even chatted about fishing to cut through the tension. A famous photograph captured that moment. Eisenhower smiling and speaking with paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division, a scene that many surviving soldiers would later recall as the moment his calm presence and warm smile gave them the will to carry on. That night, Eisenhower wrote a short message to the troops, a letter of just a few lines that would go down in history. "You are about to embark upon the Great Crusade. We will accept nothing less than full victory." The call to arms was broadcast across all units, etched into the minds of hundreds of thousands of soldiers about to set off. But there was something few people knew. At the same time, Eisenhower quietly tucked another note into his pocket, a handwritten draft accepting responsibility should the operation fail. In it, he wrote that if things went wrong, all blame would rest with him, and him alone. It wasn't just a contingency. It was a defining portrait of Eisenhower's character, a man who would order others into battle, yet be ready to bear the worst consequences himself. Fortunately, D-Day, the 6th of June 1944, was a resounding success. As Supreme Commander, Eisenhower made a series of critical decisions, delaying the invasion due to bad weather, then gambling on a brief window of improved conditions to launch the assault, insisting on unified command over strategic air forces despite pushback, and holding firm under immense pressure from both sides of the Atlantic. Each step helped over 150,000 Allied troops land safely on the beaches of Normandy, opening the path to liberate France and all of Europe from Nazi tyranny. That triumph was the result of a colossal machine, but no one denied that Eisenhower was the steady hand on the wheel. And the challenge didn't end there. After the successful landings, Ike faced a different kind of battlefield, a political and military minefield among his own ranks. Strong personalities like Montgomery and Patton clashed fiercely. Monty pushed for a single thrust straight through the Netherlands to Berlin. Meanwhile, Bradley and Patton argued for a broader front, striking the industrial Saarland from the south. Faced with these opposing visions, Eisenhower chose compromise, a full-front advance, distributing forces across both north and south. This approach, while preserving cohesion within the Allied coalition, also came at a cost. The pace of the advance slowed, giving the Germans time to regroup and launch fierce counterattacks, most notably the Battle of the Ardennes at the end of 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. Many observers later argued that Eisenhower placed too much emphasis on political balance and internal unity, instead of decisively pursuing the militarily optimal plan. Yet in the context of a multinational alliance, every decision demanded trade-offs. And in the end, it was Eisenhower's steadfast commitment to maintaining the broader strategic framework that ensured the Western Allies moved forward without collapsing under the weight of internal discord. In December 1944, the United States government officially promoted Eisenhower to the rank of 5-star General of the Army, the highest honorary military rank, equivalent to Field Marshal, bestowed upon only a select few in American military history. It was not merely a reward for the triumph in Normandy, but a resounding affirmation of Washington's and history's faith in a commander who did not fight with spectacle, but with responsibility, strategic vision, and an unshakable belief in the power of unity. Looking back at Eisenhower's path through World War II, one can say this: he was not a general known for lightning victories or earth-shattering battlefield maneuvers. On the contrary, his greatest strength lay where few could see in tense Allied meetings, on strategic maps filled with multicolored arrows, and among countless quiet clashes of ego between headstrong commanders. Eisenhower was not a battlefield hero in the classical sense. He was a master organizer, a supreme commander for the 20th century, a man who understood that in a modern, global war, the ultimate weapon was seamless coordination across forces, nations, and cultures. If World War II was a grand chessboard, Eisenhower was the steady hand guiding it. He did not need to be the queen, he was the one placing each piece with precision. The tempestuous Patton, the sharp-witted Montgomery, the quiet and thoughtful Bradley, each was used by Eisenhower as a key piece, sent into the right hotspots at the right time. He did not win by himself, he won by enabling everyone else to win. More than that, Eisenhower was the one who brought to life the model of unified command, something even World War I had failed to achieve. For Eisenhower, the Allies were not merely a coalition of nations fighting a common enemy, but a single strategic entity, with one supreme commander, one headquarters, one goal. That is how he turned ideals into action, and modern war theory into tangible victory. George C. Marshall understood this, and that's why he placed the fate of the European campaign, and perhaps the fate of the free world itself, into the hands of Dwight D. Eisenhower. Marshall was the architect of America's war machine. Eisenhower was the one who kept that machine running through storms of politics, personalities, and pressure. As historian Stephen Ambrose once put it, Marshall designed the most powerful Allied force in history. Eisenhower made it real. 2 men, 1 vision. And Eisenhower, the once quiet protégé, proved he had the steel to step onto the biggest stage history had ever built. He didn't just carry out strategy. He stamped it with his own mark. From preserving Allied unity to asserting control over air command, from shaking hands with paratroopers before D-Day to slipping a folded letter of accountability into his pocket in case it failed, Eisenhower proved he was more than a skilled general. He was a humanist leader, a man who believed that true power lies not in orders barked, but in the ability to unite millions behind a purpose greater than themselves. And when the war ended, the world saw it too. He was called the architect of victory in Europe. The press hailed him as the general who smiled but knew when to command. Images of Eisenhower in a weathered uniform, walking among soldiers, sitting calmly among marshals, became lasting symbols of a war won not just with might, but with clarity, character, and cooperation. Washington had chosen well, a soldier who had never won a single major battle until he won the entire war. And that victory wasn't just Normandy, or the surrender of Germany. It was a triumph of unity, reason, and human dignity in an age of fire. A victory that only Eisenhower and leaders like him could have delivered.